Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to the latest episode of Cannabis Unlocked. I'm very excited today to be interviewing Steve Robinson, the editor-in-chief of the Maine Wire. Steve, how are you doing today?
Fantastic and always busy. Thanks for having me on, Jordan.
Absolutely. Thanks so much. And I've really enjoyed getting to review all of the great reporting you've done, including your documentary on Tucker Carlson's network. You've done some great interviews with both him and Sean Ryan. So really excited to get your perspectives and bring it to the folks operating in the legal cannabis industry and figure out how we can work together and ensure that, the harmful products coming online from a lot of organized crime groups are not making their way into the hands of American consumers.
Yeah, well, I mean, the sad reality is that they are in vast quantities. I've been investigating the legal cannabis markets and the organized crime groups that are growing their product and selling their product in Maine for at least 2.5, 3 years now. It's undeniable at this point that vast quantities of illegally grown cannabis that is more often than not tainted with pesticides, fungicides, then the usual heavy metals and microbials, that kind of thing, are making their way to prohibition states and being sold in quasi-legal and legal markets. They're being passed off as hemp products. There's a reason that they're growing, billions of dollars of marijuana illegally in Maine, and that's because people are buying it. They're making tons of money with it, and they're selling it to an indiscriminate consumer who isn't going to have the wherewithal to test something for organophosphate toxins. They're not looking for a QR code, and if the QR code's fake, they don't really care. They're just looking to get high. So there's an inadequacy in state and federal law that the criminal organizations, in this case the Chinese organized crime, is exploiting ruthlessly to generate a large amount of money. And it's to the detriment of not only the legal businesses operating in the space, but also the end consumers. If there was some chronic health conditions being caused by smoking what we've called triad weed, we wouldn't really know about it because the effects of it would be so distributed. It'd be very hard to tell, if people were suffering the consequences of, ingesting the in some cases illegal pesticides and fungicides that are being brought into this country from China and used in these grows. We wouldn't know about it. So there's just negative consequences all across the board from allowing these criminal organizations to continue to exploit our system, yet they persist. And I would say there's probably more illegal cannabis being grown in Maine than there was when I started reporting on it.
Wow. That's crazy. So maybe we could take a step back, and it would be great if you would just give the listeners a little bit of your personal background, how you got into reporting, and how you ended up picking up the beat on illegal cannabis being produced in Maine.
Yeah, so I grew up in Maine. I went to school in Maine. I worked in political media pretty much my whole life. Did a little conservative talk radio. And I went to go work at Barstool Sports for the Kirk Minahan show. And I was producing his comedy podcast for a little while. And then Kirk came to me with the idea of doing a cold case podcast. And I thought that would be interesting. And that was really my first exposure to more of a long form investigation where instead of reporting on what happened today, you're reporting on, well, here's what our investigation found happened over the last 30 years. In that instance, we were looking for Jennifer Fay, who went missing in 1989, but we did significant boots on the ground investigation going down to South Carolina, interviewing people. And our investigation culminated in an 8-episode podcast that obviously the story was told and narrated by Kirk. And that really whet my appetite for doing this long form investigative journalism. And I came back to Maine at the end of 2022, took over the Maine Wire in 2023. So I've been running it for about 3 years now. And we had been doing political coverage and we've been doing some investigative reporting, but nothing really in-depth and long form like the documentary would turn out to be. And I guess at the end of 2023, or I guess in August or September of 2023, the Daily Caller News Foundation reported on a leaked federal memo that was a Customs and Border Protection memo that said, there's all these illegal marijuana grows happening in the United States. We think it's Chinese organized crime. The money is benefiting, narcotics trafficking, human trafficking, and the other malign activities of the Chinese Communist Party. and there's 270 of them in Maine. And I was like, what? There's 270 Chinese illegal marijuana grows in Maine? I should be able to find them. And so I started making some phone calls to people I grew up with and sources I have across the state. And I quickly learned that this was kind of like not an unspoken secret, but it was just like an acknowledged thing that, yeah, there's a significant element of, Chinese people from away who showed up when marijuana was legalized, and they don't speak English. They don't generally follow the rules. And there's some other odd eccentricities to how they operate within Maine's cannabis markets. And further research led me to discover more than 300 of these addresses and properties, really an operation big enough in scale to affect real estate prices in Maine, but certainly big enough to have affected the price of legal cannabis here in the state of Maine. And so that was really the beginning of the investigation that took me to some wild places all over the state of Maine. And eventually we made the documentary about it, which people can watch. It's at robinsonreport.substack.com. It's no longer behind Tucker's paywall as of January 1st this year. So people can watch it at my Substack. And I don't think you have to pay to watch it. I think you can just sign up with your email, and I don't spam people. I send out breaking news and investigations. But if you don't want to, subscribe for those, you can just unsubscribe. But I think it's free for everybody to watch. But that's robinsonreport.substack.com, and that's kind of the culmination, or I guess the us trying to tell through in documentary form the impact that this is having. First our investigation and what we found, but then the impact that it's having on the state of Maine, including business owners and people who don't even smoke marijuana or work in marijuana markets.
Yeah, wow. So as we're recording this in early 2026, right, I think a lot of people in the country wouldn't expect cannabis to be ripe for organized crime still, right? Because you have so many legal regulations and it's not necessarily as valuable pound per pound as a product like cocaine. So I'd love to get your thoughts on why you think there is still such a flourishing organized crime network for illicit cannabis products and how that factors into other narcotics and human trafficking, like you mentioned.
Of course, yeah. So the first thing is that it's really low risk for some of the reasons that you brought up about how there's this movement towards legalization that seems inevitable, and it's happening in all the states. Even states where it hasn't been legalized, there's a general attitude change where you're not doing no-knock raids over cannabis, and generally people are cannabis. Like there's a generational shift that has come about with thinking with regard to marijuana. You saw this reflected in President Trump's decision to reschedule marijuana out of the same class as fentanyl. In states where it's been legalized, like Maine, you see this, it's almost like a doctrine shift that's handed down to law enforcement, which is, we're not doing marijuana anymore. We're not investigating marijuana. Marijuana is an agricultural product. It's no longer the province of law enforcement. It's not your job to say whether someone is growing too many marijuana plants or if someone is trafficking over the weight limit for moving marijuana. This is just not our job anymore. They take that on a positive side and say, well, our resources are freed up for fentanyl. Retire the cannabis sniffing canines, bring in the fentanyl sniffing canines. We're going to focus on the drugs that are causing people to overdose. We no longer have to focus on marijuana. As a result of that, there's almost no risk to trafficking large weights of marijuana. And there's no risk to growing huge amounts of marijuana illegally. And the money that they're making on it can be very substantial because you're not really buying the same level of constituent ingredients like you would for fentanyl. If you're making fentanyl, you've probably got a super lab you've invested in on the Mexican border, the Canadian border. You've got to arrange for a supply chain all the way back in mainland China that's shipping you the ingredients. You have to have the expertise of somebody who's going to be able to cook it for you. And then you have to have a distribution mechanism in place that is all vulnerable to law enforcement stepping in and doing a very serious, very real, high consequences arrest or investigation into your drug trafficking network. And you have to worry about all the people underneath you getting flipped because there's going to be serious Justice Department resources behind that investigation. So all of those risks are very real. People at the highest level, I'm sure, are calculating that marijuana is much safer for the kingpins to be involved in because they know that no one's going to be flipped. They're not chasing the food chain for the triad weed kingpin, at least to the best of my knowledge. So the low risk is certainly an element of their calculation. And then their distribution mechanism, we're doing it for them. The American consumer has built out this whole network of tobacco shops and marijuana dispensaries, so they don't have to worry about street level dealing. We're the dealers. They just have to grow it and move it, and in some cases they're not even moving it. So they're taking advantage of an infrastructure that's already built there to engage in a very, very low risk activity that is nonetheless making them billions and billions of dollars. In Oklahoma, there was a congressional hearing last year, and someone from Oklahoma testified that they estimated the illicit marijuana industry there, which is dominated by Chinese organized crime, is a $110 billion a year industry. Billion with a B. That's a lot of cheddar. That's a lot of money. And these guys, I don't know what they're doing with their money, because they're not driving sports cars and buying mansions, but that money's going somewhere. So it could also be that, Jordan, that they have maybe a goal or an interest that isn't like, having a mansion in Brazil. Maybe they've got some ulterior nationalistic motives for engaging in low risk behavior that generates billions of dollars in cash.
Wow, it's really interesting. And, I think when the typical American thinks about drugs and organized crime, they probably think of the Mexican cartels and the Colombian cartels, but not as much as the Chinese cartels. So I'd love to get your thoughts on, do you view that to be a newer phenomenon, or maybe the Chinese were better at flying under the radar? And then also, one of the things you cover in your documentary is that it appears like we might be in a really scary situation, at least Maine, where there seems to be some type of turf wars between the Central American cartels and the Chinese. So I'd love to get your thoughts on all of that.
Well, the Chinese organized crime really started in California, I think in the 60s and 70s. And early on, they were involved more in gambling, prostitution. They liked to run gambling houses where other Asian migrants could come. And, you play some kind of gambling game. And regardless of who wins, the owner of the gambling house gets a cut of whatever the winnings were. But then the gambling house also lends to the gambling addicts. And if you get in debt to the house, it's not a good thing. They're going to have to break your legs or steal your car to get their money back. So that was the, gambling, extortion, prostitution, that kind of thing was the provenance of the Chinese organized crime for a long time. I think they very likely dabbled in some drugs, but they weren't exclusively known for things like fentanyl, cocaine, and certainly not cannabis trafficking. That was more what the Central American cartels were doing. And in part, that's cultural, but also it's geographic. They didn't really have an advantage over the Central American cartels, because that was where all the cocaine was going to be produced. And their, I guess, dipping into cannabis really started in California as well. One of the first states to legalize it. They were one of the first states that created the opportunity for Chinese criminal organizations to go into these residential areas, to buy up residential homes and convert them into indoor grow rooms. And so from California, the playbook developed, and they brought it to every state where there was legalization. Washington State, Oklahoma, Massachusetts, Maine. Any state that legalizes the cultivation of marijuana will likely see some kind of an effort by these criminal groups to come in and retrofit their houses to turn them into cannabis grow houses. They've perfected the operation, whether it's buying the real estate, laundering the money, trafficking the marijuana, and to your last point of your question about human trafficking, the workers. It's still a high touch, labor intensive industry. They need people there who can have this skill set, who can grow cannabis, as I'm sure some of your listeners have experience with. It's not like, it's not the easiest thing to do. There is an art, there's a craft there. And so they need to have workers who aren't going to require a lot of pay, aren't going to complain a lot, maybe can't complain, and who will be loyal to the organization and who will produce, every 40 days some product for them to pick up in their U-Haul or their Sprinter van. And the organizations that we've dealt with here in Maine, by and large, are focusing on exploited labor. And it may not fit the legal federal definition of human trafficking, which is a pretty high bar and a very specific set of circumstances. human trafficking cases are notoriously difficult to prosecute unless you have an actual victim who's willing to say, I was trafficked against my will. If you have people who are, I guess, victims who are loyal to the organization that trafficked them and won't, testify against them, it's almost impossible to ever get to a human trafficking conviction. But we indisputably see exploited labor. We see houses where search warrants have been conducted, and you or I go in there, or really any American goes in there and says, geez, this is gross. Like, there's 13 mattresses on the floor and everything's dirty, and you're like, who would live like this? But people I've talked with say, well, you don't understand. Like, maybe they came from circumstances that were worse, so they'll tolerate this, and they could be here entirely voluntarily. But it certainly looks like exploited labor to me at a minimum. And last July, the U.S. Attorney for the District of Massachusetts indicted 7 Chinese individuals, Chinese nationals, for their role in a conspiracy to grow marijuana in Massachusetts and in Maine. And if you read the indictment, they not only were they reading Maine Wire stories, but they also had a safe that contained the passports of their exploited workers. So they were snakeheads who would arrange for Chinese nationals to fly into Mexico and cross the border illegally. They would fly them up to Massachusetts, and they would grab them, take their passports, and say, you're working in a marijuana house in Massachusetts or Maine until you've paid off the debt that we've incurred for smuggling you into the United States.
Crazy.
So that is true human trafficking. These are indentured servants who have been brought here specifically to work for a criminal organization, and then they're held against their will and forced to work, the cannabis sweatshops, essentially, at the behest of these organizations. And who knows if they ever actually get their passport back. These locations where the marijuana, where we're finding the Chinese grow houses, are very, very remote. If one of these workers started to complain and you needed to get rid of a body in a pinch, it would not be difficult. So that's the specter of violence and what could be happening to these workers kind of hangs over the entire storyline. And like in Freedom, Maine, in October of 2024, there was a reported gas leak at a Chinese marijuana house, which had been raided several months earlier. No one was supposed to be there. It was kind of weird. EMS shows up, and there's 4 Chinese immigrants have been poisoned by carbon monoxide or propane. It's kind of unclear from the report. It's unclear how that happened. 2 of them died, and 2 of them later recovered at the hospital, and they admitted that they were illegal aliens who had come in from Mexico. They had New York driver's licenses, but no one ever claimed the bodies of the 2 migrants who died. So their family might not even know. Their family back in China might not even know that their only children have passed away. So it's that human aspect of the story, I think, has been underreported by some other outlets in the state. Almost nobody reported on those 2 migrants dying, which I thought was bizarre. But to your point, I guess your question about the turf war, we have had law enforcement sources have confirmed to us that there's been a string of burglaries throughout New England that seem to be targeting the owners of Chinese food restaurants who are also affiliated with the illegal cannabis networks. There's like a 1-to-1 association between Chinese food restaurants and the illegal cannabis networks. And it could just be friends, family, whatever it is. But almost every Chinese food restaurant, at least in New England, is connected in some way to an illegal marijuana operation. And you can use your imagination to figure out how money laundering works, how that would be beneficial. But the houses owned by the restaurateurs seem to be getting targeted by some kind of criminal group that is sophisticated, that has foreknowledge, intelligence, that they're likely to find a huge amount of cash at this location. And they have found Wi-Fi hotspots hooked up to remote security cameras positioned outside of the homes. So they can do remote surveillance without tapping into a Wi-Fi network and tell the patterns of movement of someone who's living there. They know when they're not going to be there. So they're targeting their home when they know they're away, going in, ransacking the place, and in some cases making off with $60,000, $100,000 cash. And the victims of the crime are oftentimes not reporting them to law enforcement. I know of one instance where it was actually reported to law enforcement. There was a family that lost like $60,000, and 7 days later they called it in. Well, gee, that's not suspicious. But these individuals ended up revealing that they were aware of multiple other burglaries that had occurred around the state. And when the law enforcement investigated what they'd found, they cottoned on to this pattern throughout New England of similar robberies occurring. And their belief is that it's another criminal organization or perhaps a civil war within an existing criminal organization that's in Maine, triad on triad crime, knocking off a rival faction, robbing them, or it's the Central American cartels, Hispanic cartels, who do business with the Chinese organized crime, are saying, you know what, that's a soft target. I could use $100,000. Why don't we just go to, this house where we know there's only 60 and 70-year-olds living, and we'll just walk in there and be $100,000 richer. So, that kind of thing, they only allow it to happen for a little while. Eventually, the muscle comes in. Eventually, there's, violent resistance to getting knocked off for $100,000.
It's really crazy. I mean, 'cause I grew up vacationing in Maine every summer, and it's never been a place that you think that these types of organized crime activities would happen. How has law enforcement in the state been able to respond at all to all of this?
Sorry, say that again.
I'm just curious, like, has the Maine law enforcement been able to get a whole grip on any of this? Like, were they prepared for this to happen, or has it really just been the last few years that it's been accelerating like this?
No, I mean, they were not prepared for it. I don't think anyone in the state was prepared for what was going to happen when we, the metaphor I've used is we essentially set a $10 billion cash pile in the middle of the state and just stood back and say, hey, come and get it. We were not prepared, and no one knew the full magnitude of the forces that would be unleashed once we gave out this jurisdictional prize of legalized marijuana. And I don't think anyone really at that time was aware of Chinese criminal groups or any criminal groups who were looking to exploit it at this level. And to the contrary, I think every representation made by the marijuana legalization advocates was that if you legalize this, the crime is gone. There's no more crime. And in fact, we're going to tax the cannabis and we're going to use it to fund law enforcement. So we're going to have more law enforcement and less crime. That didn't work out. I don't know what they're doing with the tax money. It's certainly not law enforcement. I think they've, given it to their friends or something. But on the law enforcement side, there was a deliberate decision made at the state level to stand down. Governor Janet Mills, who signed the marijuana legalization, she has ensured that the state police do not participate, do not run any investigations into Chinese organized crime. I don't know why that is. She won't talk with me. She hasn't mentioned Chinese organized crime in Maine at all for 3 years. Even when we've, cornered her in public and asked her to comment about it, she makes some excuse and walks away. Her brother, Paul Mills, is an attorney in Farmington. He also happens to be a real estate attorney who has worked with Chinese illegal growers and continues to work with Chinese illegal growers. That might have something to do with it. I don't know. I have a feeling like it's going to become an issue in her Senate race. But perhaps for that reason, the state police has just not been involved. And the Maine Drug Enforcement Agency has just not been involved. There's a few cases around the edges where they're involved, but those are unique ones. Houses that they were already aware of before this became, a national news story. And at the local level, there's been kind of a, what harm are they really doing? Because the local cops, if you just saw, one or two Chinese immigrants in your community who happen to smell like skunks and you thought maybe we're growing marijuana and they don't speak English, you're like, oh, yeah, that's kind of weird. But hey, it's a modern world. We just legalized cannabis. What are you going to do? He's not doing anything illegal. Cannabis is legal now. It was only when the local cops and sheriffs started to realize that what they were seeing at the small discrete scale was in fact a statewide organization, really an international organization that was unified, had shared supply chains, had shared money streams, shared money laundering techniques. It was only once they grasped that they were looking at a small part of a much bigger problem that they took it seriously. Mm-hmm. And even then, it was only sheriffs, the popularly elected sheriffs, had the resources, the manpower, but also the political will to execute search warrants on some of these locations. So the sheriffs in Lincoln County and Somerset County have had some degree of success executing search warrants. But by and large, in those locations, you go in there and you destroy 2,000 or 3,000 plants and you find a bunch of pesticide containers kicking around. But the people who own the site or the people who operate the site, they just go and apply for a medicinal license anyways. And then they get a medicinal license, in some cases, within 48 hours. So there's whatever the state is doing currently to combat this problem, it's not working. And I'm aware of a 20,000 square foot grow in Green, Maine that just got approval, even though one of the partners in that business endeavor is an illegal alien felon from China. He caught 2 felonies in Washington State back in 2022, but was never deported. He's one of the business partners there, and his son is the one who's on the marijuana license.
Wow.
My dog's outraged by that.
Yeah, he should be. And Steve, I think one of the things you did an excellent job covering in your reporting, which we also see from our end of the industry all the time, is that the folks who are trying to do things the legal way and paying to get all their products tested and be in full compliance and paying their taxes, not only are these cartels able to undercut them on price, but it feels like the regulators are much, much stricter against the legal operators than the illegal operators, at least in certain jurisdictions, right? And so I would love to get your thoughts on that, right? Because I think if it was across the board that law enforcement had just kind of given up on cannabis and was more or less inept, that'd be one story. But the fact that they appear to be enforcing it more heavily against the legal operators over the illegal operators almost inevitably points to some form of government collusion with these organized crime outfits. Do you think I'm being too conspiratorial there, or is that a real possibility?
No, I don't think you're being conspiratorial at all. I mean, it's indisputable, just looking at the facts, that the state of Maine has been much harder on Maine natives who, print the wrong shaped marijuana leaf on a warning label, or, like there's a guy I know who can't have like the fireball dragon on his gummies or something like that, and it ends up, it's like a $40,000 fight with the Office of Cannabis Policy over these little teeny weeny regulatory matters that don't really impact the well-being of the consumer or public safety or anything like that. If you publish something critical on Instagram of the Office of Cannabis Policy, you're going to get a surprise inspection just like a day later. Wow, I wonder how that happened. So there's no question in my mind that they're investigating more harshly English speakers and U.S. citizens than they are some of these organizations that have just like overt, obvious criminal ties. The Attorney General here in the state of Maine knows, has it said in legislative testimony, that 2/3 of the product being grown at these Chinese grow houses is moving out of state. Well, since we started reporting on these houses, they've all gone out and gotten medicinal licenses. So are we supposed to believe that all of these medicinal licenses that the Attorney General just 2 days ago thought were moving product out of state are now suddenly finding an in-state market for their product? I mean, it beggars belief that these organizations, and even, again, the director of the Office of Cannabis Policy has said in legislative testimony, we don't think that they're actually complying with the laws. We think that they're just using this as camouflage or a smokescreen to create the pretense that they're complying with the laws and make it harder for law enforcement to investigate them. But then you turn around and you see no harsher inspections for the people with out-of-state residences, who all happen to be Chinese, by the way. Like all of the growers in Maine who are licensed but provide an out-of-state residence, they're all Chinese. I mean, it's like a pattern that you can't help but notice. And the director of the Office of Cannabis Policy is really, really worried about following these progressive dogmas around, not racially profiling the Chinese, which is legitimate. There are, Chinese growers in Maine who were born in the state of Maine. The racial profiling is evil and should be happening. But at the same time, you can't blind yourself and not notice these things. And it also has swung back around in the other direction where you're giving one group on the basis of their ethnicity a free pass while turning around and throwing the book at, French Canadians and Irish guys. There's one case the case of Lucas Sorois, who is going to be going to federal prison now. He was, trying to grow marijuana legally. He operated a big growing space that had individual rooms carved out into it, and medicinal registration holders could come in and rent one of the rooms from him and grow marijuana. He was doing it at a big scale. He was one of the most successful cannabis entrepreneurs in Maine, but he was trying to follow new and emerging laws. He was trying to figure out, like, okay, what do the laws say? How can I, take advantage of this? I've got some capital and I know how to grow pot. Like, how do I take advantage of this? And there was a jilted employee who went to OCP and said, he's doing everything illegal. And OCP immediately contacted the Justice Department and the DEA and got up on Luke with wiretaps. And they surveilled him and followed him around and investigated him and went after some of the people who were working for him for unrelated crimes. And they even, they recorded him talking with his dad about Christmas trees, and then submitted in federal court documents that he was talking about cannabis plants, like reinterpreted a conversation about Christmas trees as being about cannabis plants in order to fit their theory of criminal wrongdoing. And it was successful. He's going to federal jail. He was just convicted late last year. But then on the other hand, as that's happening, I've found through public records, including OCP reports and police reports, they were also aware of this a Chinese criminal organization operating in and around the Lewiston Auburn area that went under the company title Green Future LLC. It's something we've written about extensively and covered in the documentary. But these guys initially tried to do basically what Luke was doing. They went to apply for licenses, but then when they bumped up against the requirements of the licenses, they said, well, this will make us less profitable. If we limit ourselves to just 35 plants, that's not going to make us as much money as if we grow 3,500. So they just started ignoring the rules altogether. OCP caught them, but OCP never calls the DEA on these guys. OCP never says, well, we're going to do some surprise inspections on these guys. The Green Future gang, they admitted to lying to cannabis inspectors. There were multiple police calls for missing persons at their locations. There's all kinds of opportunities for law enforcement to become aware that this, Chinese criminal organization was exploiting the cannabis laws, and they could have treated them just like they treated Luke Soroy, but instead they said, no, we're going to take a pass. Now, why is that? Why do you appear to have this double standard for these guys who came here from New York or Massachusetts and don't speak English? And, the governor's brother, does some work with them. Like, why do we have this second standard for the Chinese criminal organizations? It's an interesting question, probably one for federal law enforcement to answer, frankly, because I've been talking about cannabis for like 3 years now, and particularly the Chinese cannabis gangs. And it's getting a little tiresome having to explain to people why the organizations just keep getting stronger.
Yeah. And that leads well into my next question. As it relates to federal law enforcement, obviously President Trump, a major part of his entire platform has been focused on cutting off illegal immigration and organized crime, shutting down drug and human trafficking networks. So I would think that what's going on in Maine and other states as it relates to Chinese organized crime and cannabis grows would be top of that enforcement list. Have you seen any positive developments since he came into office?
No.
Wow. Yeah. I mean, what do you think we need to do to make that happen? Is it just a matter of making sure that our voices are being heard and that the administration's hearing it?
Yeah, I think that they're aware of it, certainly. Descheduling and Rohrabacher-Farr complicate the situation in Maine, at least, because of how many of the illegal operators or formerly illegal operators have now gone and obtained medicinal registrations. Rohrabacher-Farr says the Department of Justice can't spend money on investigations that might interfere with a medicinal marijuana program. Somehow they figured out how to get around that to go after Lucas Sorois. So maybe they could use whatever strategy that they used for Luke against the Chinese criminal organizations. But public demand for it, embarrassing public officials for not doing something is generally a good way to get them to do something. But from a national strategy level, I would say you've got to focus on the money. They're not growing this marijuana because they're deadheads and they like smoking pot. They're growing this marijuana to get the money. They're growing it because it's a way of obtaining value. It's a way of trafficking and laundering value. And ultimately, you have to figure out how they're moving the money, what they're doing with the money. That's how you're going to, effectively stop the illegal cannabis trafficking, is by preventing them from getting to the ultimate goal, which is the money. And that could mean, more investigations or surveillance of real estate transactions, because the real estate transactions are often a tool for money laundering. But that's what you've got to do. And I mean, the District of Massachusetts indictment is positive. That was in the works for a long time, but the Biden U.S. attorney wouldn't pull the strings on it or pull the trigger on it. That indictment reveals what looks like a sophisticated money laundering operation involving real estate brokers, law firms, including Chinese law firms that have headquarters in the Boston area. That's where the investigation has to look. Knocking on the door of a house where they're growing 1,000 marijuana plants and arresting some poor illegal alien from China and sending them back to Guangdong province, that stops the problem, I guess, the most obnoxious part of the problem, but only temporarily. It doesn't really get to the money problem. They have unlimited people to throw at this, essentially. They've got a huge, indentured servant workforce, and they'll just keep sending new indentured servants up to the cannabis houses. So you're not going to arrest your way out of this. You need to find the money, seize the assets, seize the real estate. Once they start to suffer a penalty that's greater than the benefit, that's when it'll stop.
Yeah, totally. And I think that's one of the things that is really critical. And, my own perspective, before Biden's presidency, I definitely would have considered myself left-leaning and a Democrat. And, certainly no longer the case. But like when I first got into the cannabis industry, I was very familiar, and you've probably heard this as well. One of Richard Nixon's aides described back in the 1970s why they added cannabis as a Schedule I substance to the Controlled Substances Act, and basically admitted that they did so as a way to suppress left-leaning voters, particularly blacks and anti-war voters. And that was kind of the frame of reference I had thinking about the history of cannabis regulations. But what I certainly missed was that there are a lot of folks on the left who have their own interests in mind, in particular folks like George Soros, who shaped the laws in ways that maybe sounded like they would be positive for the public and for fighting the war on drugs, but ultimately were really designed to benefit organized crime networks. So I'd love to get your thoughts on the role George Soros has played in Maine in particular. I know you've covered his role in a lot of nonprofits and local media in the state.
Yeah, I mean, the groups that George Soros has contributed to through the Open Society Foundation, Tides Foundation, or through the Arabella Advisors networks of groups, they're indisputably in favor of decriminalization, and not just of cannabis, across the board. They want decriminalization of trespassing, decriminalization of, they don't want anybody arrested. And that extends to cannabis. I think that the coalition of people behind legalization in Maine was much bigger than just Soros. There was a very strong right-of-center libertarian effort behind it. I mean, I was in favor of the legalization of cannabis. I probably wouldn't be now. Decriminalization seemed to be like the sweet spot, but I think that there's no question that the Soros and his money and the network that he's funded has certainly been the brain trust for policies that lead to decriminalization. And it hasn't stopped with cannabis. It continues with hard narcotics. They're trying to create safe injection sites. They've changed the amount of fentanyl that you can be caught with and arrested for trafficking. So now you can carry 200 doses of fentanyl on you and not be arrested for trafficking. There's a lot of pernicious consequences of this, broad, unthinking decriminalization agenda that are happening in Maine. And we see them, it's very obvious. There's homeless camps in all the cities. You can't walk through a park without stepping over needles. We've seen the consequences of those kind of policies. I would just say it's the cannabis legalization, I don't know if you can put that all on Soros. You can blame a lot of our problems on Soros, but I don't know if that was specifically his doing.
Sure. Yeah, that makes sense. Now, coming out of the government shutdown last year, there was a continuing resolution passed which would look to close what we've referred to as the hemp loophole and make it such that intoxicating hemp derived products are not able to proliferate the way they have. And I think that's certainly how a lot of these organized crimes, or at least one of the loopholes that they've been taking advantage of, these networks. Do you think that that could have any realistic, any real impact in shutting down these networks, or you think it's more form over substance?
Yeah, I think it will. It's going to have a long tail on it. I'm sure they'll figure out a way to sell their product to get around it. They've got a year before they really lose their sale venue. I think it will have an effect, but it's just going to be a long time seeing whether they'll find a way around it, how it factors into their business model. Will they just start adopting more illegal sales? How will it be enforced is a big one. A lot of these smoke shops in prohibition states, they're already breaking the law to sell, Chinese cannabis as if it was hemp. So do they really care? Are you going to see an attitude shift among local cops, or where all of a sudden they're going to start, doing compliance inspections? I don't know. So I think it's a step in the right direction, but it's not a silver bullet.
Sure. So let's say you were president and you had the authority to re-regulate things at both the federal, local, and state levels. What would be your ideal scenario in terms of like a regulatory framework where cannabis is accessible for the folks who want to use it and are adults, but they're actually buying real, legal, safe product, and we're ensuring that organized crime networks aren't able to proliferate? Do you have any thoughts on what that framework could look like?
Yeah, well, I guess there's the regulatory, I guess the laws and the rules that you're laying down. If they're consistent nationwide, then you get rid of this arbitrage opportunity that the Chinese are exploiting, because the only way they're making money is by taking illegally grown cannabis from a state where it's legal to grow it, and it's safe there. They can grow 20,000, however many plants there. It's safe to grow it there because of the jurisdictional protections that they have, but they're exploiting the arbitrage of bringing that product into a prohibition state. If you had a national legal framework for it, you would abolish that arbitrage opportunity that they're exploiting. So that'd be one thing, is just to equalize the policies, because we've taken national or even international demand for cannabis and hyper-focused it into states like Maine, California, Oklahoma. So those states that have legalized it are bearing the brunt of the cannabis production for the whole world, essentially. I mean, even the United Kingdom is now complaining about getting American imports, and they're not coming from, American farmers, that's for sure. So one, just have it be the same. I don't care what it is, just have it be the same nationwide. Whatever the rules are, just have them be the same nationally, so you don't have this arbitrage opportunity where the Chinese can make money by breaking the law in these little small ways that compound into a massive price advantage. The other thing is, a lot of this is about enforcement. Whether it's immigration enforcement, interstate trafficking violations, the violations of the existing marijuana statutes at the state level. The Chinese criminal organizations benefited from a reluctance to enforce existing law. So if you, from the top down, I guess as the commander in chief, if you make it a priority to prevent criminal organizations from breaking the rules, putting law-abiding business owners out of business, and harming the end consumers, then that direction ripples down through the federal bureaucracy, through state bureaucracies, and turns into enforcement. So you get traffic stops on the U-Hauls leaving Maine into Massachusetts to see, oh, hey, do you have 10,000 vape cartridges in that? You unlock a lot of law enforcement tools to be able to investigate the complaints that they're getting. So that's one thing I would say, is make the rules the same across the board, and then make it clear that it's a priority to investigate and disrupt these organizations. Just like, by the way, it would be if our kombucha was getting poisoned with fungicides and pesticides. If our lettuce was being poisoned with these chemicals, it'd be a nationwide alert going out about how this is a health threat, and if it happened enough, that company would be put out of business. there'd be an investigation into the health and safety practices of whatever organization was doing that. So you got to make the rules the same and then just enforce them. Make it an enforcement priority to prevent, illegal immigrants and Chinese criminal organizations from doing what they're doing. Maybe gets a little bit more technical, but on the money laundering side of the equation, there could be some more complicated changes made so that it was harder for these criminal organizations to launder money. One of them is that you really don't have to fill out the same level of reporting if you use a certain technique to buy a $500,000 house. You don't really have to disclose where that money has come from if you use that technique. That could be changed. You could have maybe more culpability for lawyers or real estate agents who aid and abet this money laundering activity. But those are, more esoteric changes, and I'm sure the real estate association would fight tooth and nail for that to happen. So I would be happy with just, normalizing the rules across the country and then enforcing them and making it clear that it's an enforcement priority.
Absolutely. Wow. Well, Steve, thank you so much for all of the excellent reporting you've done and for flagging how much of an issue this has become. I think I speak for everyone in the legal cannabis industry that none of us want any damaging products like this getting out. None of us want to have anything that's supporting illegal organized crime factions from Chinese cartels or Mexican cartels or whoever it may be. So thank you again for everything you're doing. And we'll hope to keep supporting you and spreading the word to make sure that we get these illegal crime networks under control.
Well, I'll say just one last thing. I mean, even just a bag holder in pot stocks, you shouldn't want this happening because, if the Chinese criminal organizations have, $115 billion in sales, that's not being counted against the capitalization of the company that you're in. You're not seeing that on your Robinhood app or in the stock market. That is money that is flowing out of the country, and investors, business owners, they're not benefiting from that at all. So if that demand was instead channeled through the legal cannabis companies, you would see the market capitalization of those companies go up. So the best thing for the investors, for the business owners, for the health of the markets generally, unless they're selling illegal marijuana themselves, is probably to have the rules enforced and the criminal organizations cracked down upon.
Absolutely. Yeah. And Steve, you mentioned the Maine Wire, obviously, and your Substack page. Are there any other places folks should go to find you? And we'll also make sure to link them all in the show notes.
Yeah, they can just find me on X at Steve Robb.
Perfect. That's easy. That's how we got connected. So I love it.
Thanks, Jordan.
Yeah, thanks so much, Steve. Have a great evening.